Welcome to the Craig and Greg Show, presented by Maximize Leadership. Now, here are Craig Owens and Greg Harris.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Craig and Greg Show. I'm Craig, sitting alongside newly minted author once again. Greg's got a brand new book out that I think that you're really going to enjoy. It's called The Business Baton. So if you think about that picture of the baton being passed in a race, there's a lot of things that go into the baton being passed, and a lot of moving parts in a foot race, but how much more so in a business. And that's what you've tried to unpack in this book. I am interested in the very first chapter because I wouldn't have expected you to open the chapter on business succession or open the book with a chapter that's talking about people being ill-prepared. I would think that by the time somebody picks up a book about business succession and the planning that goes into that, and that they'd say, I'm ready, but apparently people aren't ready yet.
No. I think there are triggers in our humanity that you really don't want to talk about the end or when I'm done, or maybe when someone else should take over. So I like to combine the succession planning and the baton handing really is leadership and ownership. So you could have a group, could be a nonprofit, where there's no ownership, right? There's a CEO of a beautiful nonprofit. They work with veterans or people with disability, and they're ready to succession plan and move on to the next person to take the baton and lead the company. So it's not just business owners, it's leadership, and that's kind of why it fits our podcast. Sorry. I think the ill-prepared partly came out of my own experiences working with business owners who I just love the journey with them, because you hear just heartfelt things on what they sacrificed, missed payroll, didn't take a vacation, missed Billy's T-ball game. And in the end, they're like, well, that was my 401k. And they're not ready to hand the baton. The company's not ready. And that's kind of what the chapter talks about, is ill-prepared, first in the leader owners, and then next the organization. So if you have people inside who are ready to take the baton, that's as seamless as it can be. If you don't have that and you need to go to a third party, an external buyer or investor, there's more chances for being ill-prepared, because they're going to do their due diligence and look at the numbers and go, oh, that doesn't add up. That's not worth buying.
Sure.
So ill-prepared isn't necessarily financial. So we starts with the owner leader. Are they ready? Are they prepared? And it's not a negative article. It's just really a challenge of, you talked about a track. So let's say you're the fourth leg on a relay race and I'm third. We have to work in that small little box to hand the baton. You have to get to acceleration speed while I am going at full speed, which isn't that fast anymore. But you can't be outside of that box to hand the baton. So there's a window. And I think the ill-prepared lesson just starts with not a negative, but a challenge of think about it, ponder it, talk to people, get your team involved, get your family involved. That's where the chapter comes from.
So what kind of, as a business navigator, what kind of questions would you come to that business owner? Because I know you've had this. People have called you and said, hey, Greg, we think we want to hire you as a navigator to help us. We're going to sell the business. What kind of questions do you get them pondering to see if they're really ready for this?
It is a process, because the journey isn't, like one meeting and you decide to do something and you're ready. It just isn't like that. Now, I can pack for vacation that fast, but you can't unpack a company story. You can't unpack the leader's, owner's legacy that way.
Sure.
Sometimes, the meetings can be a little emotional. They can be feisty. Feelings come out. But I think the part where I would hope as a navigator to get them ready, that this isn't a normal process. This is people are not immortal in business. They're not immortal in life. But I think for those that held near and dear their company, their organization, whether they launched it, or they bought it and turned it around or grew it, it's personal. It's their baby. You know? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, this, you don't really address this in your book, but I'm just wondering from your experience, somebody who started a business and it's their name on the business, does that make it harder for them to give it to the next generation, because they're like, that's my name that's up there? Does it make it a little harder to do that?
Yeah. So I'll give you a fun story. A person will say, I think my company's worth, $5 million. All right, well, let's look at that. Let's get someone to do evaluation, because the number that is important is in the marketplace.
Right.
Or if you're going to do something internally, it has to be fundable. Like you got 3 managers, but your company's worth 5. So they're going to do 1.6 something million each, go on the note for that. Can they do it? Is it feasible?
Right.
But I do think there's some reality check as you go through. Okay, the company's worth 5 million. This is my next question. And so now what do we do? Does that change who you are? Does it change how long you wish to live? Do you wish to retire quicker?
Right.
Do you think you can grow the company to 6? Is that going to really change your world? And so you ask questions about them to have them pull out what really is desirable, what their wishes are. And it is sacred to me. Okay, so that name, how important is it for the company to keep that name? Scale of 1 to 10 would be one question. 11. Okay, we're going to really have to work with investors,
right,
or the buyers, or the people you're going to merit it to or inherit it to. And if that name's that important, we're going to have to lead kind of with that. Like,
sure,
we're not changing the name.
Right.
It can be a part of another company, a holdco. But yet when they named it that way, that isn't egotistical. That actually is a brand.
Sure, absolutely. And there's some reputation that's gone along with that, and there's some loyalty with customers and vendors and employees because of that. Yeah, so sure, I can understand how that makes a difference. Throughout the book, you've got some statistics that I would say are more general. Like, you could be anybody who's a business owner, whether they just started their business or they're thinking about transferring it over somewhere or selling it. The statistics apply. But I also like, you have some case studies, and they're very specific. And some business owners, they might get to that case study and go, it's nothing like my business. There's nothing, and they kind of skip right past it because it really doesn't pertain to me. So you've kind of gone both the general for everybody, and then very specific, very targeted. What do you think people are going to take away from some of those things?
I think people like reading other stories. Their story they know well. They live it. It might be 16 hours a day. It could be 80 hours a week. They might take Sunday off is all. They're in it. But then when they see other people's stories, they're like, ooh, I don't want to repeat that with my kids. It's almost, it's an free lesson because the stories are real. They're real. Sure. Case. I didn't use their real names, but the industries are true and their struggle was true. How to get to that succession finish line. And I think people really, from my manuscript and who I tested it with, like yourself and others, they're like, I love the case study because it kind of, I don't want to use the word hammers home, but it gives a different feel. Sure. From a macro lesson in business to that's a specific business, and it plays out that was the problem or that was the solution. Yep. And it's real.
Well, one of your previous books, Sage Advice, you were sharing stories not only from your grandparents and your parents, but then at the end of every chapter, you had a leader of some kind that would share something. And you did something very similar in Business Baton too. Tell people what you did with there.
Well, I think it's one thing to write a book by yourself. It's another thing to bring others in. And my hope with Sage Advice was that the people highlighted in that book after every chapter was a place they could contact that person, ask more questions based on the questions you were asked or someone else was asked. So it actually expands their network. It wasn't necessarily to expand me, but it gives them more resources. Yep. That professional, I want to talk to him or her. In this book in particular, I used what I would call like succession business advisors as additional experts. Sure. On the subject of each chapter. So ill-prepared is one, maybe another chapter that I find really true because I love the movie is Bad News Bears. Walter Matthau is coaching these hodgepodge baseball players, and they're all just personalities bigger than life. And I've found through time, being a navigator or quarterbacking the process with the owner or leader, it is really sacred that I make sure I assemble, or he has or she has, really great teammates that can make this go really smooth. Yep. I've been in one situation just this year where it wasn't smooth, and it became, doubly uncomfortable for the owner to like, okay, this is hard enough. And then you guys aren't getting along.
Yeah.
And so I have one client right now where we're not using one of their professionals. It happens to be the CPA. Good guy, great company, been around forever. But the expertise isn't helping us move this guy closer to a successful transition. That's really what the owners' leaders are trying to get to, is a transition from I'm the main person to I'd like to be unmain.
Right.
And do a little less. So the Bad News Bears is probably one of my favorite, just because it conjures up the movie, which still makes me grin just looking at Walter Matthau coaching these guys. And I'm not even sure Walter Matthau played sports. I just look at him and I doubt he did. But that's very critical. That's a stumbling block. That's a pitfall.
Well, I think that what you were just explaining there too, the value of a navigator from the outside, because that business owner has an emotional attachment to that CPA. Maybe that CPA helped them get the business off the ground, and that there's different sets of skills. Yeah. And one skill might be getting the business off the ground. The other one might be making the transition to a new business partner coming in. And the benefit, like sometimes when we talk about coaching that we do, we're an outsider coming in. We have a third party perspective. We don't have the emotional ties inside. And it's the same thing with you as a navigator coming in. You can say, I understand your attachment to this CPA, but is this the guy that can get you to the finish line?
Right.
And you're able to do that.
Based on the assessments, we have a process that we've kind of all created, and I've kind of put some categories to it. But readiness is one. Formation, ideas. How do you get that to increase is another. And then you make your selection, and then you make sure succession is successful, whether that's a earn out or you stay around. People want to know where they are in the process.
Sure.
Like I said, it's not an overnight decision.
Well, you kind of jumped from the beginning to the end.
No, I did not.
Let's go through this. So we got readiness.
Oh, yeah, yep.
We got formation.
Yep.
What's happening there?
So readiness really comes down to, are you prepared?
Yep.
Is the company and you prepared? Is your team, whether it's a C-level team, are you all prepared to kind of hand the baton to the next generation, the next team? Maybe they're going to tweak culture a little bit or where they focus. So readiness is a decent lengthy process. The formation is forming maybe a committee, forming a plan, forming a set of goals, maybe forming a timetables, the expectations of how this should go, maybe even budget, because we're going to have to hire an attorney or a estate planning CPA, et cetera. And those are going to have costs, but that's sort of the formation of the team. And I think then the big one is, can we increase the value?
Yes, that's step number three.
Increase the value, because I have a client right now that his company is good, but they're not ready. The financials don't show what the company's worth. So we said, all right, we have 12 months and we're going to start it again. He's not in a hurry, but that's why timing is so important. That's the readiness. Is just you may not be retiring or selling the company or giving it to your kids next year, but you have to have those conversations. Then I think the selection's 4, and that really is vetting out who's the best person to take the baton. Could be a child that you have working with you, one of your kids. It could be one of your key C-level or managers, or someone that started with you, but they aren't the owner, or maybe they're a minority owner, but they're younger. They can take it to the next level. I think that whole selection process, if it's third party, they don't want to give the name up if they don't have to.
Sure.
They'd like to make sure I can come into the office and they'll still say, "Oh, Mr. Owens, good to see you again. Company's going great." So that selection process has to feel like a glove for that owner or leaders. And then I think the succession, the 5th one, is really getting down to the place of, we made the right choice. We're not going to just close our eyes and let it go. We're going to stay engaged, not in an oppressive way, but make sure that you're on the board still, or you're still an owner over time. Or maybe you give it to the kids inherited it and a little merit. and you're like, okay, they're not getting along, I'm going to stay involved. So succession still, it's not done when it's signed. It's, you still got time to make sure it's going well.
Sure.
I know of one family situation in our town where the dad got it back from the two managers he really sold it to, and they had been with him for 20 years, but they were not him. Right?
Yep.
Everyone knew him.
Yeah.
He was just the guy, just everyone loved him, and he was brilliant, and he gave great energy. The managers were more managers, not leaders yet.
Yep.
And then he gave it to him, and sold it, I get it, but he gave him a pretty good deal, and he got it back in less than 2 years. Well, now at that age, you've in your head readiness, I'm really not ready to take this over again. I just did this for 30 years,
right,
and it struggled. So really get down to readiness, obviously formation of a team, ideas, inside and outside professionals, obviously increase if we can build value or clean it up a little bit so one of the key ones would be, do you have one big customer? A buyer would be like, well, if he leaves, we lose 30% of our revenue.
Right.
So increase could be maybe diversifying the client revenue, so it's not just heavy one.
Sure.
It could be age of leaders. All our leaders are over 50. Okay, we need a bullpen. So that would be an increase of bullpen. So it's not just a number,
Sure.
but it could be we need to bring some new people in around the table. And then obviously the selection process,
Right.
That's where you pretty much know, okay, what race am I in now? I know what shoes to wear, and this is the goal. And I've had one situation where the selection process started over. It just didn't wasn't a fit for the people that were wanting to sell and hand the baton as leaders and owners. And it was a great choice by them. They just didn't feel at peace.
Yep.
So it's prayerful too. It's not just financial.
Sure, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yep. Well, there's, like I said, throughout the whole book, you got not only principles in every chapter, but I think that what I connected with was hearing those other voices that were complementary to yours. The story of an actual business, another business leader, maybe people working in the M&A field as well, that are talking about that, and so really just becomes this whole package that. Right. I think there's a lot of handles for people to grab a hold of this. But I like all the way at the very end, you have kind of a bonus chapter, which you've got a couple of words there, and I would have expected to just see finishing well, but you have finishing well, leading well. So talk a little bit about how can you lead as you're finishing, as you're handing off. I just handed the baton to you. My hand's coming off of the baton now. How am I leading well at that point?
I think a leader owner who is exiting, if they throw full support at the next team, that's leading well. If that owner comes in and is willing to be a servant leader now, not an owner leader, hey, if you need anything, there's an event coming up, I'll serve, I'll sit at the table. I mean, I'm not looking for credit. I'm just, my name's on the company name, et cetera. Yep. And I think that sort of leading well, doing without ego, giving people the honor that it's their time to run the race now with your baton that you started, that's leading well. Like I'm not going to look over the shoulder, and micromanage because you're afraid, So it takes guts to hand the baton. Sure. But I didn't say leave the track.
No.
Right. So what could happen is that person could become the relay coach.
Yep.
Right.
Still cheering them on. And,
that's leading well. You know, so I think it may be a little different role, than what they were used to, where, kind of the buck stops with you. And this is more, I don't even have a buck. I'm actually just going to make sure that the company doesn't stop. Sure. And that's leading well, like graceful, like, having class. And some, when they're done. And that is fine. That's how they want to lead well. Like, I'm going to leave my hands off. I totally get you guys can do this. Yeah. But make sure you check in with them, maybe unpublic. Like, hey, Mary, how's it going? I have a question for you. Well, I'm glad I called. Go ahead. Yep. And that's leading well. Even though maybe you don't have the power strings anymore. Sure. Yep. So it was an interesting book to write, just like your experiences with writing. You're like, I think I'm going to go with 10 chapters. Nope, I got 12. So one that I like because I lead with this. So what's your expectation through this succession process? Because succession really is the readiness, first phase. How's this going to go? Like,
Sure.
What's the outcome you want?
Right. What do I expect?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then if you have an expectation that's just unreal. I had one guy say, I think my company's worth 20 million. I said, what if it's not? How do we do that from there? Well, it's got to. Oh, I see what you're saying. All right. So your realization kind of maybe comes a little closer so we don't have that gap, which expectation, realization, frustration. And oftentimes it's very difficult for the owners, leaders to still run their company while we're in this process.
Yep.
That's really the role I love to play is you still got to keep your foot to the pedal.
Right.
Your company's, you got 200 employees, go for it.
Right. We don't want to lose value while you're in this process.
I know you're thinking of, kind of, getting out of the driver's seat, but it's not happening tomorrow. So we still got to gird you. And that's why I think that Bad News Bears team is we got to help them make sure they stay in their spot, like run the company, build this thing, grow it. And then as we get ready to transfer, the team can say, okay, we did everything and you did great, owner or owners. You didn't take your eye off the ball.
Yep.
So it was an interesting case study sample to go through. Some of them were reaffirming and reassuring that, those titles and those pitfalls that could happen to an owner maybe doesn't, or the probability is really low.
True.
Other chapters were just fun to write because it's just a common sense one. And I like what you're pointing out is there's business segment to it. Owners, leaders, how do you hand the baton? Some stats, the likelihoods or, what owners. So one of them is about, I won't give the number, they got to read the book to do it, but one of them is how many owners take their eye off the ball of the business.
Yeah.
And if you do that, so now the rest of the team is like, well, we built this over 17 years, but apparently John's ready to go.
Right.
And so you lose fuel.
Right.
And it's not as exciting. And people come in like, well, when John was hard charging, it was wonderful here, but
now
we're kind of lost. We don't have the energy, the juice,
Yep.
So we have to help the business owners stay on course. Because like I said in the very beginning, 401k is not their retirement.
Nope.
Their business value is their retirement.
Right.
And it's often their legacy. Your 401k isn't your legacy. Your legacy is lives that you changed and walked with, and of many things. So I think that's my journey as a navigator, a quarterback, just bringing people together, making sure the owner knows, the leaders know we're doing this. We're going to explore. I love this statement for an owner, for me, knowing where I'm coming from. I don't know how it's going to go, but you're going to help me as the owner, because you may want to give it to the kids and then you realize success rate's not great. Right. Or as it gets hot in discussions, one family member is like, I don't want to run those meetings. Well, someone's got to run it. Dad's going to be gone,
Right.
So I think just common practice gets a little hard for people because you're like, it's a big number. Wow, how long do I got to do this? And when they decide, there's a point where your foot's on the dock and one in the rowboat, you're like, I got to do one or the other.
Right.
Ships were not built to be in the dock. They were
Got to make the choice, right?
Yeah, and I think as a good quarterback or a navigator, you find out their worries, you learn their desires, and you try to pull the teammates together. And sometimes they have a perfect teammate. She could run a great company and have 7 great professionals, and you can use them all.
Yep.
And other times you can't, and that's okay. You have to have that real conversation. In the end, the goal is to not drop the baton.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think you can hear from Greg's passion and his experience. He knows what he's talking about. So check out Business Baton, the book, but also go to maximizeleadership.com. You can check out the page on there about a navigator and getting Greg's services and getting his perspective on what you're thinking about for your business. It's never too early to start that process. Start it sooner rather than later, so that way you know where to go with your business and you're not waiting and scrambling at the last minute. So make sure that you check that out. If you got any questions for Greg, if you got any comments that you'd like to leave, you can leave them right below here on this video. You can also reach out to us on X at Maximize Podcast. You can send us your questions and your comments comments there as well. We love to hear from you. We love to be able to resource you with what you need to be successful in your area of leadership. So let us know how we can help. We're here to resource you. Stay tuned. We got lots more content that's coming your way real soon.
Get in touch with Craig and Greg through Twitter at Maximize Podcast or at MaximizeLeadership.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes of The Craig and Greg Show.